Good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday. Welcome into Storytime with Meshla. And we are continuing this evening with Train Your Daughter, chapters 10 to 13. And before anybody says anything, no, it's not that kind of training. Get your mind out of the gutter. Somebody mentioned it a couple streams ago. It's not that. It's just cozy. That's why we're here. So, alright. And for anybody who may be new, I saw a couple of new people in chat. My name is Meshla. I am primarily an audiobook streamer. I write and read my own Star Wars fanfiction and have been writing it for about 25 years. And I decided about 6 months ago to start sharing it with the world via Twitch. So, here we go. And I also will occasionally stream some SWTOR content. That's Star Wars The Old Republic for anybody who is unfamiliar. I've been playing that game for about 12 years, basically since launch. And it's my home game. It's my favorite game. So I will occasionally stream content with SWTOR, play with friends. And I have also been... Thank you for the subscription, A-Chow. I appreciate you. Yes, I'll read that in just a second. And yes, I am all the cozy vibes today. Thank you for that gift subscription. Oh my goodness, Nar, thank you. Thank you for that gift subscription to Nar. I appreciate you. Nar is a good friend of mine. Much appreciated. And yay, my chat cat is actually working as intended. Awesome. Doesn't get used very often, but has cool little shoutouts for that. I love that. So thank you very much. That is much appreciated. And where was I? Oh, yes. So I was doing my intro spiel for anybody who might be new. And so I write and read Star Wars fanfiction. I play Star Wars The Old Republic, and I am actually considering branching into some other co-op games that aren't necessarily Star Wars, but I like to play with friends when I'm in, when I'm in the mood. So I wanted to kind of bring a couple of other games into the mix slowly. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And also, just as a general note, for those who are unaware, I will be participating in streaming for Starlight between December 1st and 12th. I have 4 scheduled streams. I added 1 extra, where we will be playing games, reading stories, and raising money for Starlight Children's Foundation, which raises money to provide gifts and games and hospital gowns for children who are in long-term hospital care, such as cancer patients or anybody that deals with chronic illness where they have to be hospitalized. So I'll be having a little bit more information about that in the coming days. Definitely on the 1st, I'll talk about it a lot more. So just keep your eyes on my Discord. I will probably talk about it here, and also on Blue Sky if you follow me there. Keep your eyes peeled for some more information. Hi, Zenny. Yes, it's going very well. Thank you. I'm trying to catch up with chat. Give me just a second. Give me just 1 second while I catch up with chat. Let's see. Shadowcon. Let's see. F 50 is cold for you? Okay. That's like hoodie weather for me. I'll take 50 over like 15. Yeah, as you can tell, I'm actually wearing layers because I don't do well with cold. So, yeah, bundle up, get cozy. Actually, what is the temperature here for me? I haven't looked. Snow? Oh my goodness. Yeah, I saw that earlier on Discord. That's crazy talk. We haven't had snow yet. Not really. I'm just looking at my phone to see if the weather is up here before I get into reading. Yeah, it was 13 degrees the other day. It was kind of insane. Okay, so it is currently 39 degrees Fahrenheit, which is cool. A little bit above freezing, but not like super cold. It's like midway jacket weather. So it's not too bad. But with the chronic issues that I deal with, I actually get cold very easily. So hence the layers. Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly when we'll get snow. It varies, but usually around Thanksgiving we get some. It really depends on how the weather has been. So, hi Ivory, welcome in. I know. I've actually been thinking about it, but that's hurricane territory, so there's that too. But I have actually considered that on a couple of occasions. There we go. But yes. Oh hey, my shout-out's actually popping up on my screen. Cool. That's a new thing that I'm testing out with Frosty Tools. Let me know if you guys like it. It's an on-screen shout-out. It has been popping up in the chat, but I'm not sure if having it on the screen like that is distracting for anybody. So please let me know. You can feel free to leave feedback in chat, but it's actually easier for me if you leave feedback in Discord. You're welcome. Always happy to shout out my friends who stream. You're very welcome. Alright, I'm gonna get some water before we get going here. And also, I am running closed captioning. I'm not using the plugin that I was, so if you guys are wanting to use closed captioning, you should have a little button that says CC down in the corner of your screen on Twitch. At least if you're watching on PC. I don't know how it would look on mobile, I haven't checked. So give that a try. It's actually a plug-in for OBS that I'm trying to see if it works. I was really wanting to... Oh, awesome. Thanks for letting me know. Yeah, it's something that I'm testing out because I have it set up to generate caption files for, like, use on YouTube, because the plugin that I was using, or the extension rather, that I was using via Twitch doesn't export with my Twitch VODs. So I was a little bit disappointed because I wasn't getting closed captioning when I exported them to YouTube. So that's good to know that it's working. I guess the real test is going to be, does it translate well to YouTube? So I guess we'll find out. Also, yes, cozy flannel shirt, because I'm cold, but I don't want to bring out a hoodie, so. Yeah, it's not 100% perfect, but better than not having it, I suppose. I'm definitely working on trying to have my stream be more accessible to people, and I know that some people will lurk and just have me on mute and kind of like hang out, which is totally fine. Yeah, accents, or if you have an issue where you might not speak very clearly, it doesn't necessarily pick it up as well. It's gonna have a really hard time with the Mandoa words, so that'll be interesting. Oh, that's right. Thank you for that. I can fix that right now. Thank you for that reminder. I didn't think about that. Thank you. Thank you. Should probably add it to the stream title too, actually. Now that I think about it. My titles are long enough. I just added it to the tags, so it should be there. The nice thing about the OBS plugin, like I said, is that you can have it generate closed caption files, which I could then edit to have the correct words and maybe a translation in there. That'd be cool, actually. So I might do that. So you can have it export to like a straight text file or, you know, something like that. So I'm testing it out, and I would love your feedback. So if you want to leave feedback here in chat or in Discord, either one is fine. Discord, I can find it later. But I'm glad that it's at least mostly working. I actually have a caption feed here, so I'm seeing what it's transcribing, which is actually really helpful to me. So that's really nice. And it actually does punctuation too, which I'm like super excited about. I was a little bit disappointed with the ultimate closed captioning extension for Twitch because you didn't have options to like add punctuation, but this you do, which is quite nice. And being able to export the closed captions themselves to a text file is useful because then you can edit it to what you need. So you can kind of customize it, which is really nice. Also, I'm trying to keep my hands away from my face because some people might be lip reading. I don't know. So, definitely trying to keep my hands away from my face so that I don't block that. Yeah, what is it actually called? It's a closed captioning plugin specifically for OBS that uses like Google Cloud Translate, based on what your your mic is picking up. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but so far it seems to be working really well. So, all right. Closed caption is added to my tags. So, all right. Let me get some more water. Yeah, so if anybody is interested in closed captions, let me actually... I'm going to find it real quick. Give me 2 seconds. You're going to hear me type in. Let's see. Let's see. Give me just 1 second. Okay, here we go. Yeah, it's actually on the OBS website under plugins. So I'm just gonna grab you the link for that. It's super useful. I literally installed it yesterday. So for anybody that is curious, you can find it there. It's really easy to install, so it took me like 5 minutes. I watched the YouTube video and it kind of walks you through how to do it, but it's really easy to do. But if anybody needs help with getting that set up, if they'd like to use it, let me know and I'd be happy to help. Hi to Sniper, welcome in. Alright. Also did a little bit of rearranging. Ah, yes. You're welcome. I also did a bit of rearranging on my layout, specifically because I do routinely use captions, so I wanted to allow space for that and not have my face covered by the captions. So that was the thing. Yeah. But yes, definitely let me know what you guys think about the captions, because that's a new thing that I'm trying, and let me know what you think about the on-screen shoutouts that is done via Frosty Tools. So let me know if you like it. It's Frosty Toast is something I already use, and they have an on-screen shout-out feature, so I'm trying that out. Not sure if I like it, but if you guys like it okay, I'll keep it. So I was just trying to find a spot for it that was a little bit out of the way. Alright, let me move some things around here while I get going. But yeah, so far the closed captions seem to be working really well, which I'm excited about. Alrighty. So we're starting this evening with chapter 10. We are reading the story that I've shortened to, I generally call it Train Your Daughter, or TYD for short. The full translation of the Mandoa phrase of the title is Train your sons to be strong, but train your daughters to be stronger. It's a Mandalorian proverb, actually, which is really cool. I'm that much of a nerd, so yes. Oh goodness, sorry. Oh my goodness, so sorry about that. Didn't mean to spike my mic. Yeah, for anybody that's curious, I do occasionally have issues with coughing post-COVID, so just be aware that that's a thing. It doesn't mean I'm actually sick, it's just something that's kind of been hanging around. So I will occasionally cough. I feel like I have a tickle in my throat, which is not nice. One sec. There we go. Yeah, I didn't want to blast anybody's eardrums. Okay. Alright. Chapter 10. Where are we at, captions? Okay. No. The captions went away. Why? Okay. Oh, it's probably because I muted my mic. One sec. Are you guys still seeing the captions? Give me 1 second. Okay. My captions went away. That's not cool. Are you guys still seeing the captions on stream? Please let me know. Oh no, it's probably because I muted my mic. No. Hi, Zoo. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna play with it for a sec. Captions. Okay. Yeah, sorry, give me 1 sec while I sort this out. Okay, what? Why is it not? Save. Okay, yeah, looks like I lost it. Oh, there it is. Okay. To mess with it, but it's back now. Yes, welcome in, Zoo, and anybody else who wandered in while I wasn't looking, welcome. I have spent the last half an hour, well, 20 minutes, chatting, but that's okay. Like, I'm just catching up with everybody. Just so everybody is aware, we do have an ad starting in about 4 minutes and 15 seconds. So I will try and read a little bit. I will endeavor to stop before the ad starts because I know not all of you are subscribed to the channel, and that's okay. I'm doing my best to pay attention to when the ads are so that you guys don't get interrupted rudely by the ads. So let's get started here. Ooh. I mean, dragons are cool. Can't go wrong. Also, if you see me looking off to the left, it's because I moved OBS over there so I can see chat. Yes, dragons are cool. Alright. Chapter 10. And I'm going to read until I hit the ad, so we'll see how that goes. The following day, Marin woke up early, before even Jarius. That was unusual, but something had woken her. She couldn't figure out what it was. With a sigh, she rubbed the grittiness from her eyes and pushed herself to her feet. She dressed in a fresh tunic and pants, and then took a few moments to straighten her hair. The colors of the tunic were close to those of the ones that Jarius often wore. Barefoot, she shuffled into the galley, finding a stool he'd left. She pushed it over to the counter as quietly as she could and climbed up, before dipping a handful of the loose herbs that made up the behot into the percolator before she filled the other chamber with water and closed the lid. After a few moments, the scent filled the galley. Carefully, she set 2 mugs on the counter and took the pot from the percolator with both hands, carefully filling both cups before she put it back. Then she climbed down from the stool and reached up to take both mugs in her hands before walking towards his cabin. Jarius was stretching his shoulders in the middle of the floor when he heard the soft tap on the door. "Enter," he called. He got up and moved to pull on the tunic he'd chosen for the day. As that door opened, he started to attach his weapons belt. Carefully, Marin triggered the door control with her elbow before she went inside. "J'ai the voiture, Buer," she said, looking up at him. "Good morning," he said, as he took the cup of behot she offered. "Ready for the day?" She smiled a little at his question, glad she dressed when she got up. "I am. Master Card said something yesterday about starting lessons?" She paused a moment, trying to think about how to phrase it. After a moment, she shrugged. "I really would like to learn the Jetikad," she said after a moment, sipping from her mug. Jarius paused, sipping his behot before he answered. He knew it was on her mind when she saw the students practicing in the training circle. "How strong of a desire?" he asked, softly. Marin chewed her lip for a moment before she answered. "Very strong." She paused, wondering if it was a good time to ask him the question she couldn't get out of her head. He nodded once more as he knelt and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I believe you," he said. "I could feel it yesterday, but understand you must ask Master Card, and you must prove to him that you are willing to commit." Her eyes widened. "How can I do that?" she asked softly. "I can't explain it. I don't want to become Jetize, but something about the Jetikad pulls at me as if I'm meant to learn." She shrugged, unable to really find the words. "It doesn't require a commitment to the order," he told her. "He won't demand that of you. The path you walk is of your own choosing. If he takes you as a student of the sword, he will expect a lot of you. And if you take up the way, I will expect it too." And I'm going to stop there because we have an ad in about 20 seconds. So I will stop there. So we're going to have an ad. Take your minute and 30 seconds to get some water, have a stretch, grab a snack, because that's what I'm going to do. I don't have any snacks today, but I can go get one if people think I need one. Yes, all the hydration. All the hydration. Yes. So I'm just gonna sit here and stretch. Oh, there's the ad finally. Sorry. A little bit of a delay. And I'm not gonna mute my mic because the last time I did that without captions. Sorry. So, no muting the mic. At least not that way. Alrighty. like I said, for anybody that's not hearing the ad right now, this is a few things that I'm testing out. So, just seeing how they work. And would definitely appreciate feedback on what you guys think. I've never actually played that. So, I've heard of it, but I've never actually played that. So, should be back in about 15 seconds. Ooh, I will check that out. Sounds interesting. And we're back from our ad. Thank you guys for hanging out and sticking it out through that ad. I do appreciate it. Unfortunately, I have no control over the fact that there are ads. I wish I did. Hi, Megagenic. Welcome in. Good to see you this evening. Haven't seen you in a minute. Hope you're well. Let's see. There we go. It's gonna pop up on the screen too. There we go. All right. Yes, no healing priorities for me today. Just cozy vibes. Alright, and let's go back to our chapter. Had to remember where I was. Mirren fidgeted. How do you mean? She asked, quietly, draining her mug and setting it carefully on the desk behind her. He gazed at her for a moment. The way of the sword is very special to us. The katani, I mean. Starting that path means a great deal, and learning the lightsaber is the epitome of it. You want to prove yourself worthy of it. He lowered his head somewhat. Something that I don't feel I have proven. She lifted her hand after a moment and gently touched his cheek. Why not? Because of what you told me about your past? Yes, he told her. There is much that was done that I regret, daughter. I haven't earned that right. Mirren bit her lip, again feeling his grief, and something else she wasn't used to feeling from him. Shame? For a moment she was quiet before she buried her face in his shoulder. He put his arms around her and held her for a moment. Ask the master, was all he whispered. I am proud of you for having the desire to learn. She nodded. I wish you could too, she said, against his shoulder. But she knew that there were too many dark things in his past. Now she understood why he didn't have a lightsaber. Sighing, she wrapped her arms around his neck, trying to send him all her love, for she knew it had to be difficult for him to be here. Do you know where I can find him this early? He's already making his way to the Praxium, he told her. Always an early riser. She almost asked him if he'd come with her, but somehow she felt that she should ask Master Card herself. I'll just gather my knife, and then I'm ready to go, she said, nervously rubbing the back of her neck. She'd need to figure out how to ride the horses alone. Stefan's movements were fluid as he moved the boken around in a kata of the second form. His robe, vest, and outer kimono neatly folded outside the training circle. The other students were not yet awake, having seen to it that he would have time to run through a different kata every morning. His eyes were closed as he moved through each pose. Mirren had finally managed to make her way up to the Praxium, though it wasn't easy. With no one to show her how to saddle the horses, she went on foot, glad that she remembered the way. She finally reached the entrance and stopped, leaning against the boundary wall to catch her breath. After a few slow breaths, Mirren tugged on her tunic, pulling it straight before she made her way into the courtyard, spotting Master Card as she did so. She was nervous now and had to take more deep breaths, remembering what Jarius and Ethan had taught her about focus. Stefan noted her presence as she entered the courtyard, staying at the edge. He didn't break his focus as he continued through the kata. It would have meant breaking discipline, and he wouldn't have that. His eyes remained closed, but he released himself to the force as he transitioned from the classic kata of the second form to his own form, the seventh. Blending all of his mastered forms together with the release shown to him by his friend, he continued to move fluidly, but the speed of his movements picked up as he let go into the force. His boken was almost a blur now. Marin watched for several minutes, kneeling on the paving stones a few meters from the circle's edge. She knew better than to intrude, as Jarius had taught her a little bit about the training circle. She was amazed by the speed with which he moved. She watched for a bit longer before focusing on her own breathing again, much as she had in the forest, as she listened to everything around her, hearing the rustle of fabric as he moved. It wasn't a Jedi meditation technique, but it helped her focus nonetheless. Impressive, she heard, returning her attention to the training circle. Stefan was standing there observing her, the boken in his left hand as if he were holding a sheathed sword. His smile was warm and honest as he walked up to her. Did Jarius teach you that? Marin blushed, opening her eyes as she looked up. Alec, he did, she answered quietly, climbing to her feet. J'ai the farteur, Master Card. I didn't want to intrude. You haven't. And good morning, he said, as he bowed. A pleasant sleep, I trust? He moved to where his robes lay and began to slip his outer kimono back on as he noticed her walking towards him around the outside of the circle. She's staying on the outside, showing respect. Did he teach her that as well? I am impressed. Well enough, Vore, she answered with a hesitant smile as she walked towards him, mindful of the boundary of the training circle. When she reached him, she responded to his previous question. Buir taught me that technique. It helps me to listen when I'm in the forest hunting or training. And it helps calm me, too, she admitted after a moment. Stefan couldn't help but smile and nod at her answer. It's a fundamental technique that we use to clear one's mind and focus, he began to tell her. I taught Jarius the same technique when I first found him. I'm happy that he decided to pass that knowledge on to you. She blushed. It's helped a lot, especially during some of my more recent training. She wondered for a moment if she should tell him about it. He nodded as he finished putting on the rest of his robes. I'm glad he's showing you these techniques, even the ones that might involve weapons. It's still a dangerous galaxy and will always be so for some areas. It's a good thing to learn. Now, it's time to wake the others. He started to walk away, the boken still in hand, towards the covered area and motioned for her to follow so they could continue the conversation. What would be a good place to start your training? He asked as they walked together. Marin followed, glad that he'd shortened his stride a little. Then she blinked. How? She stared at him in shock and then shook herself, taking a deep breath. And then she had to fight the urge to fidget. I'd like to learn about the Jethicon, she said softly. That stopped Stefan in his tracks. He stayed there, frozen, thinking before turning around to face her. I felt the desire in you when you saw the sparring yesterday, but I wonder, how strong is that desire? Marin flushed and had to clasp her hands to stop from fidgeting. I can't stop thinking about it, she finally said. It pulls at me. He nodded softly. Has Jarius told you how the way is treated here? He has, she said, softly, not looking away. He nodded once more. The way of the warrior requires a deep commitment, Marin. We Katani consider it an almost spiritual thing, and you feel that without any doubt you are ready to start down this path? She took a deep breath and nodded. She couldn't really explain it, but somehow she knew. Alec, I do, Master Card. He lifted his hand. No, there's more. The lightsaber is the weapon of a Jedi. To learn how to wield it is also to learn those teachings, regardless of whether you actually walk that path. Most other masters wouldn't give you this opportunity without a student devoting themselves to the order. I am not one of them, Marin. But you must understand what you will be taught. Are you still willing? That stopped her for a long moment. Jarius's words from earlier came back to her then. She was silent as she considered what he was asking. I am, Master Card, she said firmly, her voice quiet but firm as she looked at him squarely. Stefan stood there, returning her gaze and feeling for himself the determination in her heart. Her heart is strong, this one, he thought to himself, thinking on it for a few moments. He shifted the book into his right hand, gripping it in the middle, and extended his arm with the book horizontal towards her. She looked at him for a couple of heartbeats, but then she figured it out. It was much like Jarius presenting her with the blaster when she began that training. But this, she knew it was more serious. After a moment, she slowly reached out, gently gripping the book on either side of his hand, her palms facing upward as she bowed towards him. She wasn't sure where the prompting had come from, as Jarius had yet to teach her some of the more formal things in Katani culture. Stefan held his grip on the book as he continued to look at her. "Words are just that," he said. "Show me the same determination today with the others who are just learning the way, and you will be my student." Marin swallowed, knowing that he meant it. After a moment, she nodded as well. "You shall have it, Master Card," she said, bowing once more. Stefan nodded, releasing his grip on the boken and continuing towards his destination. It was a large bell in a covered area. 4 large columns of stone supported the timbers that suspended the bell and the roof covering the entire area around it. A smaller timber with a decorative rope was hanging on the supports beside the bell. He grabbed hold of the cord and pulled the timber back and then threw it forward to strike at the bell. The bell gave off a deep, loud sound that seemed to echo throughout the monastery. He struck it twice before letting the timber rest and walking back to where Marin had been standing. From the stone building attached to the opposite side of the courtyard from the main hall, some students who were up earlier started to exit to the courtyard. Most of the other students were beginning to awaken or finish preparing themselves for the training. She looked around the courtyard, noticing the sun beginning to peek over the slate roofs of the nearby building. While Master Card was occupied, she slowly started working through the warm-ups that Jarius had taught her. She was finishing as Stefan returned. There was no specific schedule here, he told her, as the rest of the students began to exit their rooms and gather in the courtyard. But generally, we'll do some light exercising before breakfast. He gestured towards the training circle, noting that some students were starting to line along the outer edge. One stood in the center and slowly led the others in some stretching exercises. Marin nodded and looked at him momentarily before slowly moving to the edge of the training circle and placing herself between 2 other students. The exercises were similar to those that Jarius had taught her, though some were different. She turned her attention to the student in the center, trying to follow as best as possible. Stefan watched her and the others as they moved through every motion. He had started to teach them to loosen up muscles and prepare them for the day. Once they were finished, he walked through the line and moved towards the center. "Thank you, Jared," he said to the young man as Jared moved to take the only remaining empty spot in the outer circle. "Today we have another potential candidate for training." He motioned to where Marin was standing. "Marin, daughter of Jarius, comes to us with a strong desire to learn the way. This day, treat her as one of your own. If you see anything that would benefit her during this first trial, do not hesitate to do so. Here, in this place, she is as much your sister as your siblings, as you are to siblings, to each other here." He looked to the others in the circle and asked them in Katani, "Understand?" "Yes, Sensei," the students replied. "Very good," he said. "Start on the trail for the run. Breakfast will be prepared and ready when you return." Slowly, they started to file out of the courtyard through the main hall into the doors beyond to start on one of the trails that ran around the mountain. For a moment, Marin looked back, one of the last to file from the courtyard. She was used to training in the woods. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. She sighed, reminding herself to focus as she almost tripped. She was lagging a little, being smaller and shorter, but Jarius and Ethan's training had helped some. By the halfway mark, she was struggling. She'd trained in the forest, but that was mostly flat. Her legs were already starting to ache as the group crested yet another hill. Oh, she wanted to stop and rest, but if she did, she'd be left behind. Gritting her teeth, she tried to push the pain away. She'd given her word and meant to see it through, but could she? She felt an arm help hold her up, and she looked to see the one that led them through the stretching helping her along. "After a day or 2, you get used to the thinner air on the mountains and all the ups and downs," he said, keeping up a good pace. "You should have seen me when I first tried this run." Marin tried to smile at him, but her lungs burned instead. "Foray," she said softly, her cheeks flaming. I'm used to the forest floor. It's flat. She smiled hesitantly. I wasn't even used to that, Jared said, with a smile. My homeworld is flat grassy plains with only a few forests and mountains. I was limping the rest of the first day. She giggled a little bit and reached down to rub her calves as she paused to pull her canteen with the other hand. When she had finished, she stood, a twinge of discomfort passing over her face before she gripped his arm in the Mando fashion. I'm Aaron Durza. Jared, he responded, and they continued on the jog. Foray, he repeated to himself. I hadn't heard that word before and grew up knowing Huttese and a few other languages. What language is that? For the first time, Marin smiled, and it actually reached her eyes. It's Mandoa, the Mandalorian tongue, though it's not my native either. I'm learning 2 languages at the same time. She paused. It means thanks. Mando? Jared asked as his eyes widened. Wow, I've only read about them in MasterCard's books. I never thought I'd ever meet one. Marin blushed, but then smiled. I'm still learning. I wasn't born to it. She paused, running a hand over the hair that had fallen into her face from her ponytail. I was adopted by Jarius Durza about 8 months ago, I think, she said, surprised that she would tell him even that much. Wow, that's a lot to go through, Jared said as he laughed softly, all he could manage during their run. As they continued along the trail, slowly they started to catch up with the rest of the students. 8 months and you're already here. I've been here for the better part of a year myself. Hi, Rafe. How are you, sir? Marin nodded and shrugged. I can't explain it. I learn fast. I soak up things like a sponge. She thought a moment. My brewer suggested I come here for training, and I thought it would be a good change. I've been rather stuck to home for the last few months with the training I've been doing with him. I can just imagine the training he's put you through, Jared said with yet another short laugh as they caught up to the others. Don't worry. A few others have only been here for maybe a week or 2. They were just Jedi Padawans here in the beginning, getting advanced training from Master Card, and then he started searching for certain candidates to train from the beginning. She frowned. Is it normal to be that selective? She asked, hoping she didn't offend him. Well, as he says, there are different roles that the Jedi have to fill. One may be excellent in one role, but doesn't have the talent or ability for another. Master Card is one of the best swordsmen in the Order, and that's where his ability has always lied. So, here, he teaches that art and others that would be necessary on the battlefield or other situations. She nodded slowly. There was that talk of Jetise again. I came here to learn what I could, and I ended up asking if I could learn the way. She blushed. The way you said that sounds like you felt like you had to learn it, he said as they continued. Being men, though, are you thinking you'd have to choose between the 2? She nodded. At first I did, but now I know that I shouldn't have worried. She smiled. Buir is proud that I wanted to. Now I just have to keep up. She saw that they were within the rest of the group now, nearing the monastery again. See? Almost there, Jared said as they approached the gate. As Master Card had said, breakfast was laid out in the main hall for them when they entered. Marin smiled at him as they slowed to a walk in the courtyard. Foray for the company, Jared. Talking helped me keep going. Company usually does, Jared said with a smile as he gripped her arm again in the warrior's grip. And welcome to the Praxium. She smiled. He'd remembered. Vorentia, she said, nodding towards the main hall. Whatever it is, it smells good. It's about the normal standard, Jared told her with a laugh. Master Card knows what it takes to keep us going through the day. He brought regular people from around the local villages to keep the grounds, prepare the meals, and they can definitely cook. She grinned. I guess I'm about to find out then, because I'm hungry. She looked around the large room, seeing the tables filling up as she scanned for an empty seat. She'd finally found a seat at the end of one of the long tables after she'd been through the food line. She had to admit, she was pretty hungry, but she tried to keep Jarius' words in mind as she ate, chewing slowly. That run had been challenging, but she still felt strangely energized. The boken MasterCard had given her earlier lay across the end of the table, and for a moment she looked at it. She'd never used one before and wasn't even sure how to hold it. Sighing, she ran her fingers over the smooth wood momentarily before returning to eating. I hope I can live up to my words, she thought, her eyes returning to the smooth wood. It was such a simple object, and yet so much rested on it. She ate quietly, not noticing any of the other students. She'd spotted Jared on the other side of the hall with some of his friends. When she finished, she took her plate to the dish room and slipped out into the courtyard again, finding a clear area off to the side. She took the boken in her both hands, trying to get a feel for it. Over here, she heard, off to her left. Looking in that direction, she spotted another older man motioning for her to follow. She recognized him as the younger Jedi that MasterCard had overseen the sparring. No, sorry, let me try that again. She recognized him as the younger Jedi that MasterCard had overseen the sparring yesterday while he had spoken with her and Jarius. Knowing that he could be one of the instructors, she turned and walked over to him. You're new to learning the sword, correct? The Jedi asked as she approached. I am, Sensei. I am Marin, she replied. With a slight bow, she held the boken at her side in her left hand. My name is Dylan Card, he told her as he returned the bow. If you'll follow me, I'll begin your training with the others who are just starting to learn. He turned to walk out of the courtyard and through the main hall, heading towards another part of the grounds. Yes, Sensei, she answered slowly and carefully in Katani, following him as he led her through the monastery. She had not seen this part of the monastery yet, and looked around, taking it in. She knew she was safe here, but scanning new areas she'd never been to was still a habit, nonetheless. He led her to a courtyard on the opposite side of the main hall from the training circle. This one had a different pattern of stones that she was starting to learn to be the training circle, but it had a line of them that other students were lining up along, with bokens in their hands. Dylan gestured for her to join them as he walked to a spot in the front of them. Another boken was there for him as he shed his outer robe and took up the weapon in his right hand. All of you are new here, he said, as they stood there, listening. My name is Dylan Card. I am your instructor in the art of the saber for this first part of your training. So you know, I am not a Jedi Master, but a Knight, so there is no need to call me Master or Sensei. Teacher will be sufficient. If you are wondering why a Knight and not a Master, you needn't worry. I am a skilled fighter, and of the basics you will be learning well. Now, are we ready? While he'd been speaking, Marin switched her boken to her right hand as his was. She looked across the courtyard at him, filing away that bit of information before she answered with the rest of the students. Yes, teacher. Very well, Dylan said as he held the boken in his right hand. The first thing is the proper grip of the weapon. You see where my right hand sits at the top of the grip? Grip it from the top, not the side. Your index finger should be loose, but your other fingers have a solid grip. Go ahead. Marin frowned and switched her grip around slightly until she felt the boken sitting more comfortably. The grip wasn't fully round, but more a bit of an oval, which fit neatly into the part of her hand between her index finger and thumb. With it properly situated, she wrapped her fingers around the grip, keeping it firm but loose near her index finger. Good, he said as he watched all of them. Now, you want the widest possible spacing between your hands on the grip. To do this, grip the bottom of the handle with your small finger sitting against the end of the grip. This hand, you do grip from the side, not the bottom. For a moment, Marion studied how he'd placed his hands before she slid her left hand to the base of the grip. The smooth wood pressed against her fingers as she wrapped them around loosely as he had. She thought it felt a bit more stable than a one-handed grip, and she flexed her fingers a little bit to adjust slightly. Dylan watched, walking over to correct one or two of them. Then he walked back to where he'd been standing and assumed his basic stance. His right foot led the other in front, and he shifted his weight on his back leg with his elbows brought closer to his sides. The blade pointed forward and slightly upwards. Your right arm is where the strength of your attacks come from, and the control of your strikes comes from your left. This is the basic fighting stance for all 7 forms. Any attack or block can be done from this position. Marin smiled a little as she adjusted her stance to match his more closely. It was similar to the stances Jerry's had been teaching her when she was beginning to learn the dagger and the blaster. It gave more balance and stability than keeping one's feet close together. She was glad at least that that part made sense. Dylan stood from his stance and walked along the row of students, making minor corrections here and there. He moved to where Marin stood and nodded softly at how well she'd adopted the stance and grip on the weapon. "Very good," he said as he continued to walk among them. "Master Card will tell you later that to truly appreciate the sword, or the lightsaber even, one must first learn to hold it in stillness. Hold the stance, let go of any thoughts you have, and feel the weapon. It is not just a piece of wood, not only a weapon. This will become an extension of yourself and your will." She nodded, again, drawing on that same technique that Jerry's had taught her so many months before. She could feel the smoothness of the wood against her palms, which were slightly sweaty. It had a satisfying weight, one that wasn't too heavy or too light. It was just right, and it reminded her of its presence in her hands. She could almost feel as if the boken belonged there. Though she hadn't intended to go into the full technique, she heard the other students breathing. She could feel her pulse and slow breathing as she stood there, feeling the breeze tease her hair. The boken, she wasn't sure how it was possible, but it felt as if it belonged in her hands. And that's the end of chapter 10. Sorry guys, my neck is real stiff for a second. Wraith, how are you doing? Having a good day so far? Awesome. Alright. I can get through like the first paragraph or two before we go into an ad, sorry. Chapter 11. Throughout the rest of the day, Marin had proven to Master Card her desire and determination to learn the way, and her training at the Praxium over the next several weeks was never more challenging than she could handle, but it pushed her level of endurance. But she pushed back, improving in every way. Jared had been right. The runs through the mountains got easier after the first few days, and she could keep up with the other students who'd been there longer. Adding to the runs, she included flips into the exercise, especially when it dealt with climbing over obstacles along the course. Stefan covered all aspects of the Force, from stretching and fine-tuning her senses to beginning to discover her abilities to move and manipulate objects, such as her innate ability to use the Force and pass through security measures. Her natural ability, they found, was how she could keep her presence from being noticed when she focused on it. It was a talent that started her down the path of learning Force concealment and stealth. But her techniques in swordplay continued to gather his attention. As she kept practicing under Dylan's tutelage, he started covering more stances and techniques of the first form of lightsaber combat. She picked it up quickly and began to move with a sureness, showing more grace and almost acrobatic agility. She began to practice kata by herself, and in the sparring that Dylan started to oversee. And I'm going to stop right there, because our ad's going to start. Take your minute and a half, go get some water, get a snack, get a blankie, get cozy. Yes, actually, Shadow, yep. I actually had to, sit down and, like, rework the order that the stories had to be read in, because I was reading them out of order. But hey, yeah, so essentially a Jedi Shadow. Yeah. No dual-bladed lightsaber, though. She wields, single. Well, she will, rather. I should say. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. We should have an ad starting here in just a few seconds. Unless it's gonna make a liar out of me. There it is. But, yeah, take your minute and a half. Take a bio break. Get some water. Get a snack. Get a blanket. Hug your kids. Hug your pets. If you have them. So, to be back in about a minute. I definitely try not to read during the ads. Ooh, excuse me. Because I find that it's disruptive for people that aren't subscribed to the channel. So I try to be aware of that and stop reading before the ad starts. Doesn't always work, but I try. Okay. Alright. Okay. And we're back from our ad. Thank you guys for hanging out. I really appreciate that. And we can continue with our story. Yay! I'm actually really glad I wore the long sleeve shirt, because, yeah, it was cold. It can get quite cold where I live, so being warm is a good thing. Oh, goodness. There we go. Okay. Jarius remained proud of the achievements his daughter was gaining at the Praxium. He stayed on Catan for a short time, looking up and accepting contracts that wouldn't take him far from her. And during his latest visit, he started to see more and more as he watched her spar with the others from a distance. He wanted to talk with Stefan about it later and could tell that the Jedi had something in mind. She's showing a lot of promise, Jarius said as he and Stefan sat on the veranda outside the Card's kitchen and looked out over the gardens. Jarius had never been to this part of the grounds of the Card household and was amazed. It seemed like it was a mix of elegance and simplicity if ever there was a way to blend them. She has, Stefan told him as he sipped his tea. Her skills with the Force, especially being able to stay hidden, are more than I've seen in any student for quite some time. Her abilities with swordplay, it was almost as if she was meant to learn it. She has such a natural ability. You say that like you have something more advanced in mind, Jarius asked warily. I do, if you'll permit me, the Jedi answered. She's showing signs of being able to go beyond the first form already, something the others haven't done yet. I had originally intended to focus on the first, but I feel that there is another that would suit her abilities and probably her personality better. You will teach her yourself? Jarius asked. Not yet, Stefan replied. I think it would be better for a fellow practitioner to begin showing her what I have in mind. Jarius stood, nodding. He wasn't in much of a talkative mood, and it was something that Stefan was beginning to pick up on. What's troubling you? I can't figure it out, Jarius said as he shook his head and walked around the veranda and thought. I keep having this foreboding sense of something happening. I've had this recurring dream of Marin alone, crying, for me, as if something has taken me away. Could they be just dreams, or possibly premonitions? Stefan asked as he stood up and walked over to his friend. I don't know, Jarius said after a long moment to think. I just don't know, Master Card. The future is always in motion, Stefan told him, trying to ease his mind. And if you truly think that something is going to happen, it will find a way, whether you want it to or not. Put it out of your mind, Jarius. It does neither of you good to dwell on it. Jarius nodded, though more to himself than to what Stefan was saying. Okay, I'm heading to the ship to see about some rest. A contract needs my attention, but I'll wait until the afternoon to leave. Marin entered the courtyard from the quarter she'd been staying in the Praxium early in the morning. She'd gotten into the routine of wanting to practice the kata she was learning before the others got up. Seeing Master Card practice that first morning inspired her to do everything she could to learn. When she reached the doorway leading outside, she heard a low hum from the courtyard beyond and knew immediately that it was a lightsaber. She fully expected it to be Master Card practicing this morning as she walked outside, but she was surprised to see someone else in the middle of the training circle. Marin had never seen her before, yet something about her presence immediately got Marin's attention. She wore the same colors that Master Card and his son Rinius often wore, But it wasn't what Marin would have considered the attire of a Jedi. She wore the kimonos and a vest, but also had on a skirt and leggings with her boots, and her red hair whirled and flowed as she moved through the kata. What mesmerized Marin was the way that she moved. She spun and jumped during her strikes, her motions with the green blade almost as smooth as Master Card's were. As she looked closer, Marin could tell that it was a similar but far more advanced and graceful than the way Marin herself had started to move during her own training. So she knelt on the ground outside the circle as she watched and studied every movement. It seemed like she would go on for a while longer when, in one smooth motion, the lady landed from her jump and held the pose, lightsaber high, until she stood slowly. The green-bladed lightsaber in her hand was spun once, and then shut down as the woman brought it smoothly back to position on her belt. She turned to see Marin there, and she was surprised once more. She was a young lady, but very pretty from Marin's point of view. She pulled her red hair back behind her ears. Her smile was warm as she walked up to Marin. "You must be Marin," she said as she got there and helped the young girl stand up. "I see you two have just met," Stefan said as he approached them. "Marin, this is Her Royal Highness, Andrea." It surprised Marin again. This new Jedi before her was a princess? "Daddy, please?" Andrea said with a soft laugh. "Do you have to try and pull that on her? She's been surprised enough as it is." And again, this time Marin's eyes went wide. Not only a princess, but Master Card's daughter? Andrea shook her head. "I apologize, Marin. You don't have to feel intimidated by me. In this place, I am a fellow Jedi." At Andrea's comment, Marin flushed and nervously shuffled her feet. It was as if Andrea could read her thoughts like words on a page. After a moment and a glance at Master Card, she looked back to Andrea, and then bowed politely, saying carefully in Katani, "I am Marin Durza, Miss Card." And then she switched back to basic. "I enjoyed watching you practice, and I noticed how you move is similar to how I have been during my own practice. I am wondering, what form do you practice?" "Well, if we're going to be formal," Andrea started to say before she laughed softly. She then knelt to be more on Marin's level. "It would be Princess de Garmo now, but we won't be formal here. You can call me Andrea or teacher, since you're why I'm here." Marin blushed again, slipping back into a Mandoa in her embarrassment. "Nisita, teacher," she said softly after a moment, before looking shyly at the woman who knelt to her level. "You're here because of me?" she asked in surprise, with another sideways look to Master Card. "Dylan and my father have noticed how your movements have been during practice," Andrea said. "It's showing signs of what we call the fourth form. It's more acrobatic, shall we say. It's also a form that I use, and we thought that since I'm here on Catan while the other person Daddy thought about helping you learn is away, I could start showing you more about it." Marin smiled. "I'd like that very much," she said. "The other?" "Another Jedi who was a student of mine," Stefan told her. "And a good friend of mine," Andrea added. "She's also learning to walk the Mando path. She stops by here frequently, so you'll probably get to meet her at some point." Sorry, my earbuds were popping out. Marin frowned for a moment, their words pulling at her memory. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to pull the memory forward. And then she remembered, when she'd first met Ethan, Jarius had mentioned meeting someone. She opened her eyes and looked at Andrea. "Would that person be Callista?" she asked. "Buir mentioned meeting someone the last time he was here, a lady that walks both the path of the Mandaware and the Jatise." "Aye," Andrea answered with a smile. "That's her. And just as Jarius adopted you, she's part of our family. But now," she stood and stretched for a moment, "you and I will head to a different location today. You're the only one who's shown a preference for this particular form, and there's an area towards the valley that we'll use for your training." Marin smiled and nodded. "Yes, teacher." She was glad she'd taken to carrying a canteen with her. While she wore a tunic and pants in the Katani style, she still wore her knives on her belt. She knew that she could trust those here at the Praxium, but Jarius and Ethan had impressed on her the importance of carrying them. Since she was still too young for Beskar Gam, it was her way of wearing armor and honoring the Wrestlenair. She bowed politely to Mr. Card and followed Andrea as the older woman led her across the Praxium grounds. Going through the main entrance, Andrea called a pair of horses over from where she had left them grazing. They were different from the ones Marion had ridden up from the Card's house, with different saddles. From my husband's stables, Andrea told her as she mounted one of them. And if you sense 4 people at the edge of the woods, don't be alarmed. They're here because of me. Marin blinked in surprise. She had indeed picked up on them. How had Andrea known that she could? She shook herself. How did you know? She asked as she carefully mounted the one remaining horse. She was better at it now and was glad that Dylan had taught her an easier way to mount. I can pick up on thoughts easier than others most of the time, Andrea said as she glanced towards the tree line and waved to them. And I knew that they were there already. They're select members of the Jatal Erem, the Royal Guard. She started down the trail with Marin behind her. One of the downsides of being married to the heir to the throne is that I don't have the freedom of movement I once had as a Jedi Knight. But I know their concern. It is their duty to protect me. She laughed at the thought for a moment, even though they know I'm perfectly capable of doing that myself. They've seen me practice. Marin couldn't help but giggle a little at the faint feeling she got from Andrea. And then she nodded. I guess it's kind of like Beer with me. He knows I can take care of myself. He taught me for Amanda's sake. Yet he still worries. She shrugged a little. No, that's him being a father, Andrea answered. Mine's the same way. Marin flushed slightly in embarrassment. I guess, she allowed after a moment's thought, wondering if she'd said too much. Andrea turned and smiled, hoping to let her know that there was no offense as they reached a clearing ahead. Different-sized rocks scattered along the clearing, and there was a high wire strung between 2 taller trees. Here we are, she said as she dismounted, letting the horse move to the side to graze. Marin slid out of her saddle, landing quickly now. Once on her feet again, she looked around momentarily, scanning the area out of pure habit. Thank you, darling sunshine. I appreciate you. Thank you. I needed that. Whoop, bumping my mic. Thank you. Oh. Yes, I definitely needed that. I'm trying really hard to not slouch, so it's actually like, it's straightening a little bit. Okay. Oh my goodness. Like, it's so bad, especially because I sit so much at work. So I'm trying really hard to not slouch. It's so terrible. I can sometimes have the worst posture in the world. Okay. Here we go. Marin slid out of her saddle, landing quickly now. Once on her feet, she looked around momentarily, scanning the area out of pure habit. Again, she picked up the 4 presences hovering just at the tree line. Her eyes widened as she gazed at the wire high above the ground. A practitioner of the 4th form shows more agility than any of the others. Well, except maybe the 7th, Andrea began to tell her. But there are not many of those around. Does Mr. Card practice the 7th form? Marin asked, after considering that. I've seen how he moves, and it's similar to how you also do, but more... She paused momentarily, trying to find the right word. Spontaneous? Flowing? She smiled shyly. I'm enjoying learning from Dylan, and I feel a little of that flow when I move, too. Daddy does practice the 7th form and 3 others, blending them, Andrea told her. Dylan's style is closer to the 3rd. I'm assuming that you know of all 7, correct? Somewhat, Marin answered. Dylan explained a little about each of them. Andrea nodded. Dylan's chosen form focuses on defense, mine on agility, the 2nd on dueling, the 5th is usually more on power, while the 6th tries for balance. The 7th, well... The 7th is more about the release. Marin frowned. Just moving with the flow of the Force? It calls for the full release of yourself, to the Force, yes. Few Jedi can master it because it can open one up to the darker part of themselves. Only one other besides my father can do so right now. Marin gestured for her to continue. She was trying to learn as much as possible, soaking up bits of information like a sponge. After a moment, she sank onto the soft grass to rest. The focus of the fourth, as I said, is agility and being able to move quickly, Andrea told her, before leaping into the air and flipping backwards as she did so. Then she landed on one of the taller rocks nearby. How well you can jump can be a key part of that. Have you done anything like this yet? Alec, a little, Marin answered as she stood again, studying the rock for a moment. I started working some flips and such into my morning runs, she said, and then a moment later she took a couple running steps and leaped onto the boulder next to the one Andrea stood on, landing in a crouch. Very good for your first time, Andrea said to her. Eventually, you won't need a running start and will be able to land on more delicate areas than this. I'll demonstrate. Oops, 1 second. She leaped again, higher this time, and landed gently on the wire above them, toes on the wire, and was able to keep herself balanced as if she were still on the rock. Eventually, Marin gasped. Kandosi, she breathed. So far, the thinnest thing she'd climbed on was one of those tree branches back home. That's the end of chapter 10. Is it 30 already? Oh, I spent like a half hour talking at the beginning of stream. That's why. We'll see. Yeah, some of these chapters are a little bit short. Oh my goodness. I know, right, Wraith? Chapter 12. This is where it gets interesting. My goodness, so sorry about that. Chapter 12. A few days later, following Andrea's lessons, Marin again found herself in the same clearing. The sun was starting to dip towards the trees as Marin began with some stretches and then moved on to working on Form 4. Her movements were slow at first, as she was adjusting to moving on grass instead of the paving stones of the Praxium courtyards. Eventually, she found her footing and began moving a little faster, her movements becoming smoother as she found a rhythm. As Dylan had taught her, her breathing was slow and measured as she moved into each stance. It helped her keep focused. She was so focused that she barely noticed the flicker that meant someone was nearby. She ignored it momentarily, thinking it was just Jared or one of the instructors. Her broken was almost a blur as she moved from one stance to the next, spinning and rolling out of the way of imaginary strikes. She'd began working in some of the unarmed Terraskasi as well. She dropped and rolled, lashing out with her left foot as if she were sweeping her opponent's feet. She came out of the roll, her boken clutched firmly in her hands as she used it to guard her back from her imaginary opponent. He crept slowly along the grass. He didn't wear his armor due to the noise it would make and the fact that it would be cumbersome with the task he had before him. Ethan had been on the move for hours now from the clearing that Master Card had permitted him to land at for the test that Jerry's had in mind. He had experience moving through woodland terrain and had adapted the outer set of clothes he wore to the terrain around him. A few leaves and branches in scattered places to help the colored cloth blend in further with the Katani landscape as he moved slowly and surely on soft-heeled shoes. The only other thing he had with him was his waist pack that held his rations with 2 soft canteens of water on both sides. In his arms was a specialized rifle that fired stun darts. It was scoped as well, so he would be able to approach from a distance. He knew Marin's senses would have improved by now, so he would have a more challenging time avoiding detection. The only choice would be a strike from a distance. He knew the area he was heading to, but had a map with him as he got closer to the indicated area. He kept his steps slow and checked his footing as he crouched down as he moved closer to where she was. As soon as he started to see the edge of the clearing ahead, he stopped and lowered himself to the ground. He moved up to a fallen tree, laid the rifle down along it, and checked the settings on the scope as he settled in, adjusting his cover to help conceal him. Marin paused in her kata, sensing a faint flicker at the edge of the trees. She stood still then and closed her eyes, reaching out in the force. She felt the faint pinpricks of the forest creatures, but they didn't seem disturbed. Whatever it was gone now, elusive. Shaking her head, she began moving through her kata again. He watched the pause, knowing that she was checking the area. He slowed his breathing until he saw her begin her kata once more. He kept his breathing slow and his finger on the trigger guard. With the speed of her movements, he'd have to fire when she paused, so he adjusted the pressure settings quietly to gain more velocity with the shot. She lunged towards her imaginary attacker, driving a hard fist towards where the throat would be before she spun away and blocked a high strike. She still couldn't shake that elusive feeling, but she couldn't pin it down either. Cursing under her breath, she shook her head again. Wow, let me try that again. She significantly improved, Ethan thought, as he watched her movements through the scope. He might throw in a few additional tests with the main one that he had planned. He continued to watch her movement through the scope. Impressive. He flipped the safety off of his rifle and followed her with the weapon. Marin's danger sense flared. She came out of her roll and lunged, facing towards the trees as she scanned again both with her eyes and her senses. "Shaza," she muttered, shaking her head again when she didn't see nor sense anything. If there was someone there, they knew how to hide. But who would be hiding here? With that thought, she brought her boken to the front and took a few cautious steps towards the tree line. He waited patiently as she walked closer. The shot would have to be perfect, so he moved the crosshairs to her center to guarantee that the stun dart would have full effect. Patience soon was rewarded as she stopped at the tree line. He let his breath out slowly, held it when he got to the end, and fired. Marin's danger sense screamed, but still, she saw nothing. Whatever it was, she knew the worst thing she could do was turn her back. That thought cut off abruptly as she felt a burning, stabbing pain in her upper chest. She looked down, her hand brushing reflexively at it, but her vision was already tunneling. She slid to her knees, blinking as she tried to focus. Stunt dart. Her thought cut off abruptly as she slumped forward onto the grass, unconscious, the boken falling from her slack fingers. Ethan stood up slowly from the shot, his hands shaky from the adrenaline rush. He threw his hood back and revealed his painted face to help him blend in. He took his rifle in hand and walked to the edge of the woods to look her over. "Definitely one of my tougher stalks," he said to no one in particular as he kicked the boken to the side. He knew it would be picked up later. He then removed the belt that held her knives, draping it over the rifle before picking her up in his other arm before he started the trek back to his ship. Going over the same terrain would take a few hours, but she would be asleep for a while. Enough time to prepare her for the trial, put away his rifle, and have his other gear ready. Sorry. He reached the ship in record time, quickly putting her in the outside hold. He laid her down in the bay with stun cuffs locked onto her wrists before he went to the armory. He cleared the rifle's magazine and stored everything before pulling a carbine of the same type from his storage. He checked over all the parts and went to pull a magazine of lower strength stun darts. He kept his camo on, pulling a comlink out and set it to transmit to the PA speaker in the hold. He wouldn't be waiting in the ship when she came around, but he would be outside. For the moment, though, he settled on a meal to strengthen him for what would happen next. When he finished, his last preparations were to restock his pack with rations and place one with Marin's weapons belt outside the hatch to the cargo hold. Marin woke slowly. Opening her eyes slightly to guard against the light and her pounding headache, she found only darkness. At first, she panicked and tried to move, only to be rewarded with a jolt from the stun cuffs. She fell back to the deck, breathing slowly as she tried to stop twitching. Just great. She laid there momentarily, letting her breathing slow as she cautiously reached into the force. She couldn't risk moving again unless she wanted to get zapped. "I see you're awake," Ethan said into the comlink, having been alerted when the stun cuffs first jolted her. It would begin. Now. Marin turned her head, trying to find the source of the voice. She reached out in the force again, but there again was that elusive feeling. Taking a slow brush, she lay back against the deck plates and asked, "Mekawani, in typical blunt Mandalorian fashion. I am here to test you again, Ethan told her through the comm channel. But this will be much more difficult than when I tested you before. Marin swallowed. That voice. It sounded so familiar. She sat up in surprise, but was rewarded with another jolt from the stun cuffs. Once she'd stopped twitching, she spoke again, her voice wary even though she couldn't see. What must I do? She asked, although she was already trying to figure out how to kill the stun cuffs. The situation is, you have been captured, she heard over the speaker. You have not left Catan, but must escape before the possibility exists. You know you are wearing stun cuffs. The cargo hold hatch and the exterior hatch are locked down. You must escape the ship and evade capture as you return to the Praxium. I am waiting to hunt you, and I have weaker stun darts that will render you unconscious for a shorter time, but you only have so much time to return to the Praxium. How long? She asked, warily, turning her face towards the speaker his voice was coming from. It is midday, now, Ethan told her. The Praxium is close enough to where you should be able to reach it by midday tomorrow. Marin swallowed again. I understand, she said firmly, reaching out in the Force once more. He wasn't in the cargo hold, so he had to be nearby. Breathing slowly, she began focusing as she had been taught, trying not to move as she zeroed in on the stun cuffs and began tracking the wiring in her mind. Ethan cut the comm channel and settled into the position he'd chosen, that overlooked the clearing the ship was in. He would give her only a little time in the woods before he started the hunt. Marin lay there on the cool decking, feeling sweat trickling beneath her tunic as she focused on the task at hand. It seemed like a small eternity, but finally she found the proper connection and pulled the wires free with the Force, shorting the cuffs. They fell to the deck plates a moment later with a muted clank. She sat up slowly, pulling the blindfold from her eyes before she rotated her wrists. Her head swam slightly, but she sat still until it passed, and then she climbed to her feet, creeping towards the hatch before she crouched in front of it. She knew this would be more challenging than it had been to break into Jarius' ship. She crouched there for several minutes until she felt her calves begin to cramp. Just when she would have given up, she found the final connection to the last entered code. Holding her breath, she completed the connection and was rewarded with the cargo hold hatch sliding partway open, just enough for her to slip through. Quickly, she buckled on her weapons belt and clutched the pack in her fingers as she slipped through. The corridor beyond was dim, but not so much that she couldn't see as she carefully made her way down it, slipping the pack over her shoulders and unsheathing one of her knives. Cautiously, she continued down the corridor, reaching out in the Force to check ahead as she did so. Again, nothing. Maybe he's not even on the ship, she thought, as she crept down the central corridor. After a few minutes, she reached the main hatch. Again, no one. She frowned and knelt by the hatch controls, sheathing her knife as she did so. The same thing again. Thankfully, most computerized lock panels were built similarly. This one took a little more time. The code was longer. She could feel sweat tracing down her back as she painstakingly traced each wire to the last key. Frowning, she held her hand over the panel, trying to get a sense of the order in which the code had been entered. After 30 seconds, she hesitantly punched it in, holding her breath, as the main hatch finally slid aside. And I'm going to stop there because we're about to be in an ad. Probably pop up in about 10 seconds. Sorry. Neck is hating me right now. Alright. Oh, right before we go into an ad. Nice. Thank you for that stretch redeem. I appreciate you guys looking out for me. Because I'm like notoriously bad about that. So I appreciate that. That's why I have all those self-care redeems, because I'm notorious about not doing that. So, thank you. Much appreciated. We're probably going to be a little bit past 9 o'clock because we're only like halfway through chapter 12. So, yeah, that's the thing. Kind of expected that the chapters are longer. And then also spent, 20 minutes chatting. But that's okay. I don't get to do that very often. Oops. That's not what I wanted to do. Okay. No. Oh, nice. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. And we're back. Thank you for that stretch. It actually took up most of the ad break. I appreciate you. As I was saying during the ad break, which I will repeat for those of you who were in ads, I usually stop at 9 for reading streams, but I may go a little bit later because we're only about halfway through chapter 12. So we'll see how that goes. And it's currently like 8:40. So we'll see. We'll see. Alright. That took less time than I expected, Ethan thought as he pulled out a small set of macro binoculars and looked down at the end of the boarding ramp. There she was, coming out of the ship and getting her bearings. He set the macros down and checked the scope and settings on his carbine, ensuring a stun dart was loaded and ready. As Marin carefully descended the boarding ramp, she scanned the area. Her eyes saw nothing, but in the force she felt that same nagging, almost there feeling, off to her left. As that thought registered, she felt a warning tingle as she had just before the first dart. Dropping to a crouch, she palmed one of her knives and dropped quickly off the side of the ramp, trying to use it as cover as she began moving along the lower edge of the hull. Very cautious, he thought as he watched her through the macros again. She probably knows something's up, but not what. He watched her movements through the macros, giving her a few more moments before he started to creep forward from his perch to start the hunt. Slowly, Marin moved along the lower hull before she finally ducked behind the ship, hopefully putting it between herself and Ethan. She could still feel a faint warning tingle, and she knew she had to get further away. He kept quiet, but moved steadily, watchful of every step he took through the foliage with the carbine close. Keeping his movements parallel to Marin's, he would give her a short distance before he started closing. He'd already determined to make it more challenging than the first time. Marin's steps were cautious as she used the force to scan around and ahead of her, mindful of where she stepped. There was that nagging feeling again of being watched. She knew she was at a disadvantage as her katani tunic and pants weren't designed for this sort of thing. They were in more muted blues, but weren't camo, and therefore much more challenging to hide. Keeping her knife handy, she took a slight turn off her previous course, reminding herself that a straight path was the fastest way to get caught. Ethan started to close the gap quietly, noticing that she'd begun altering her path. Good. He stayed as quiet as possible, pulling his hood over to ensure he was completely covered. The carbine was ready now, and he had the safety off as he continued to move with her. That tingle again and a cold rush of adrenaline. He's closing in, she thought. She ducked around a large tree, tightening the straps of her pack before she took a couple of running steps and jumped, using the force to push her upwards as Andrew had shown her. She was glad now with all the practice she'd had on the runs in the mountains. Grabbing at the large limb with both hands, she used the grip to pivot onto the branch, balancing carefully as she scanned again. He heard the sound and stopped, crouching and waiting. It sounded like she'd run for a moment, but then nothing save for the sound of a branch moving. She's taken to the trees, he thought, as he stayed there, the carbine at his shoulder. It was good that he'd painted the weapon to blend in with the terrain. Marin stayed balanced on the branch, catching her breath as she looked around and always mindful of where she placed her feet. one wrong move. She took a few slow breaths, focusing as she continued scanning. He was still close. She knew that he'd have her if she went to the ground. Balancing carefully, she took a few cautious steps towards the end of the branch and picked another tree about a dozen yards away. She took one more careful step and leaped, tucking her body as if in a roll before she extended again. Her target loomed closer, and she reached into the forest as she'd been taught, using it to slow her fall as she grabbed at the branch she was falling towards. She sucked in a breath as the speed of her jump caused the bark to dig painfully into her palms, but she ignored it for the moment, swinging up onto the limb in a crouch. It was off to his left, and up. Ethan turned slowly, adjusting the angle of fire as he looked through the scope to see if he'd spotted anything. He caught what he thought was a form on the limbs, but held his fire. It could just as easily not be her, and a miss would result in the dart impacting a tree. The sound would alert her that he was within range. Marin crouched on the limb, taking slow breaths to slow her racing pulse. That warning tingle was an almost constant buzz at the back of her mind, telling her he was indeed close. Carefully, she clung to the trunk, shimmying around to another branch and praying to the lady that she didn't fall. She scanned again from her new vantage point, making sure to vary her path. Then she picked her next target and leaped. It wasn't as hard now, as she was starting to get the hang of it, but her palms burned. He watched the shadow intently through the scope's crosshairs. It started to move, and he followed it to where she landed. "I have you now," he thought, as he led her just a bit, and fired. The tingle at the base of Marin's neck turned into a silent scream of warning in her mind, just like it had before. "Sisbon," Marin cursed, crouching, but she didn't have anywhere to go. Again, she felt the sharp sting as the dart bit into her arm. With her last bit of strength, Marin flattened herself against the limb, praying to the lady and to the Manda that she didn't fall when she passed out. Some time passed, and slowly, Marin woke again. "Shoplet darts," she cursed silently, slowly lifting her head. Oh, the world spun, and then she remembered where she was. "Dariem," she muttered under her breath. "You're lucky you didn't fall," she told herself, carefully moving to sit up on the limb as she fumbled with the inner lining of her tunic and tore 2 long strips, which she then wrapped around each of her palms. She knew he'd probably heard that, but it was better than leaving drops of blood. She rose to her crouch and moved around the tree to another limb, pausing to take a few sips from her canteen as she planned her next move. It was faint, but even amidst the sounds of the forest, the sound of ripping fabric reached his ears. Ethan checked the chrono and noted that it was already past time. She would be awake now. He would give her a little more time before he resumed his hunt. Slipping her canteen back into her pack, Marin scanned the trees again. The tingle was faint, but still there, meaning he wasn't as close, but he was watching. She slipped her pack back over her shoulders and picked another tree, breathing slowly before she leaped again. This one was a bit farther than the last, but she was starting to feel more confident. When she landed, she took a few moments to catch her breath as she scanned again. "Staying in the trees?" he asked himself. He heard the rustle of leaves, but not the sound of an impact on the ground below. Pulling out his macros, he scanned the area in her direction, but saw no sign of her on foot. What had she been learning at the Praxium that gave her the ability and confidence to stay up in the trees? He picked up the carbine and started on his own path towards the Praxium. He'd wait for her in a different part of the forest. Marin kept to the trees for a good while until the light filtering through the canopy started to fade. No use moving about the trees at night, she told herself. She landed carefully on the limb, still feeling that faint tingle. Eventually, she knew that the trees would thin out and she'd have to go to the ground, but she wasn't sure how far she'd come in the past several hours. She hadn't reached the perch he selected when he noticed the sun starting to set. A slower pace than Ethan had thought she'd take as he kept looking over the area. It wouldn't be long before he would have to go to either enhanced mode on his macros and scope, or maybe, he thought to himself about the other option. Would she think it fair to use thermal? He decided against the thermal and attached the night vision filter to his scope. He also pulled out a compact set that fit over his eyes like goggles. It was still quiet in the woods, but that wouldn't last long. Night creatures would start to emerge, and he would have to be alert to detect her by sound. This would be interesting. Marin crouched in the tree for several minutes, surveying the area. She still couldn't spot Ethan by eye. She knew he was too good for that, but she could faintly sense his general direction. He wasn't moving, for now. With a sigh, she leaned against the trunk for a moment, digging some jerky from her pack and nibbling at it. She wasn't particularly excited about moving at night, but she wouldn't reach the Praxium in time if she didn't. Swallowing the rest of the jerky, she carefully hefted her pack again, glad her eyes had adjusted to the dimness. She looked around cautiously and chose her next tree. It was closer than before, but she wanted to avoid risking longer distances in the dark. He settled in a bit further, carbine at the ready. Call it intuition, but he felt that she would soon cross the area. It was just a question of whether it would be on foot or still in the trees. Marin stayed put for a few minutes, studying the trees around her and scanning the forest below. It was getting dark, and she'd have to stop soon for the night. With a sigh, she moved again, one tree over, before shimmying down the trunk and landing as quietly as possible. She'd also been working on that skill, sneaking off at times when she wasn't training. Soon, Ethan thought, as he kept scanning the clearing where he'd chosen to wait. She had to come by here at some point. This was the only route to the mountain pass which led to the Praxium beyond. Cautiously, Marion moved across the forest floor, scanning ahead with the forest as she moved through the trees looming above. The haunting calls of the forest creatures echoed in the darkness, the sound seeming to travel almost forever. He thought he'd seen a trace of movement. It wasn't easy to tell from just using the goggles. He slid them up and brought his carbine back up, started to zoom in on where he'd noticed the movement. Marin's danger sense tingled as she felt the sensation of being watched intensify. She froze, flattening herself against the nearest tree as she cautiously scanned the darkening forest. There was no trace, but he knew he'd seen it and didn't want to alert her. It was almost the same instance as before. Almost. He had an idea in mind, but first he tried to put the search out of his mind. Maybe his thoughts of intent would tip her off. He didn't know, really, how the force worked. Marin stayed still, breathing slowly as she closed her eyes and reached out again. He was nearby, but he wasn't moving. She frowned. Was he waiting for something? She shook her head. Her danger sense had yet to spike again. After a moment, she crouched low and moved slowly and quietly towards the next tree. He saw the movement of branches, just slightly, right where he had the crosshairs, and he didn't hesitate to fire. Fairfic, Marin breathed, ducking low, but the pounding warning didn't lessen. She thought she'd seen movement off to her right, and then the dart hit. She staggered, slipping to her knees among the dry leaves as she tried to fight it. You're getting better, but it's still too easy, he said quietly, knowing she'd hear it as he got up. He shook his head, grabbed some jerky out of his pack, and started chewing on it as he started further up the trail. After another half hour, he'd picked another spot, ensuring he was well concealed. The 30 minutes passed, and Marin rolled over with a groan, a faint headache behind her eyes. She sat up slowly and dug in her pack for her canteen, Ethan's words ringing in her ears. Still too easy. What did he mean? She scowled and brushed her tousled hair from her face as she figured out where to go. She couldn't keep moving for much longer. She'd had to rely heavily on the force as the tree canopy blocked most of the moonlight. After a few minutes, she stood again and moved off at a tangent to her previous course, considering taking to the trees again for a moment, but she knew it would be too dangerous in the dark. It was a good, quick nap, and the vibration of his earpiece woke Ethan up as he took another bite of jerky and a sip of water. Would she keep coming? Of course. She would if she wanted to make it here by the time he'd set. Cursing silently, Marin moved cautiously through the trees, constantly scanning ahead. That tingle was now in the back of her mind, a constant reminder as she watched the shifting shadows. She was glad for the cool darkness, but it was harder to see. She was moving along well and stopped suddenly as she felt the warning tingle again. She stood still, breathing and listening to the forest as she scanned again. It was still there. Shaking her head, she moved off at an angle, away from that almost there feeling, keeping to the shadows of the trees even in the dim light. Any time now, he thought, as he kept looking around. So far, he hadn't heard or seen anything. He stayed still and quiet all the same. Marin kept moving along her new path, keeping as low to the ground as possible to minimize her profile. He had to be using something to see her in the dark, but she could barely see. She frowned, her movements cautious as she moved into the shadow of the next tree and leaned against the trunk for a moment. He paused in his scanning, slowly bringing the carbine scope back towards his right. Something was odd. Her danger sense spiked and Marin froze again, holding her breath. Yep, definitely using macros. She stayed still, reaching out on the force. You don't see me. It's just a shadow. She pushed the thought in his direction. He paid close attention through his scope, and he almost wanted to laugh. It was a Katani wolfhound that had started to come through the line, sniffing the air. And then he froze. Wolfhounds were only out at night for one reason. To hunt. Oh no. What if he's close to Marin? Something else intruded on Marin's awareness. It wasn't Ethan, and it didn't feel human. It was more like the stag she had helped Jarius bring down onto Nagas, but it felt different. She swallowed, not daring to move. What now? Did she dare take to the trees again? For a long moment, Marin stayed still, scanning with the force. She knew better than to move too much. Slowly, her hand slipped to one of the knives at her waist, and she pulled them free of the sheaths as quietly as possible, working to keep her breath slow and even. She could feel Ethan close by, but he didn't seem to be moving. His attention was on the wolfhound in his crosshairs. The decision nagged at him. Did he hit it with a stun dart and take out the possibility of it attacking Marin, or seeing if it would discover her and attack? He kept his crosshairs on the animal, still wondering about the choice when the animal raised its head, ears pinned back. Marin's breath caught in her throat as she felt a shift in the creaser's attention. Fairfic, she cursed silently, gripping the knives more firmly. Carefully, she peeked around the tree trunk, swallowing in surprise as she saw a faint movement, not even a dozen meters away. Sheathing the knives, she didn't even think. She just leaped, catching the tree's lowest branch about 10 meters up, and swinging onto it, crouching as she drew her knives again. Ethan caught the movement of her jump and landing, but he didn't worry about it. The wolfhound caught it too and started to look up and growl, the hair on its back rising. If he remembered right, they were persistent, and it would be a waste of time waiting for it to move off, so he centered his crosshairs between its shoulder blades and fired. Marin's danger sense flared. She flattened herself against the limb, narrowing her focus a bit as she lifted her arm and flicked her wrist, letting one of the knives fly. She'd never done it before, but she kept her attention on the knife, only relaxing as she faintly heard it strike. The wolfhound yelped, and then again as something else struck it. She felt it convulse once and lay still. For a moment, she lay on her belly along the limb, scanning the area and wondering if she dared go retrieve her knife. Ethan nodded softly and lowered the carbine from the ready position. You have half an hour, he said, from his perch. The wolfhound was unexpected. Move on the ground, fast, and then settle down and proceed as before. She knew he'd been close and almost succeeded in not jumping in surprise. She was silent a moment as she took in his words. She knew it best not to stray from his instructions if he told her something like that. After a moment, she spoke softly, but loud enough for him to hear. Alec, Ethan. She sat up on the limb, doing her best to get her bearings as she mentally marked his location. She dug more jerky and water from her pack, eating before she swung down off the branch and took off as quietly as she could. She knew it wasn't wise to stick around a dead animal, which would also draw other predators. Yep. And I'm going to continue until we finish this chapter, because I told you that I was going to go through chapter 13. So, we are going to go through chapter 13, even though it's almost 9. We'll see where we go. Alright. Give me one sec. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to keep going because I told you guys that I was going to read chapter 13. Oh, okay. This isn't quite as long. I'm going to take a drink of water. Could somebody do me a favor and do the meds command? I think it's might be up for everybody. I can't remember. Definitely mods, but can't remember if it's anybody else. If somebody could pop the meds command, that'd be great. Because I'm a nerd and I forget things. Sorry, that's noisy. Chapter 13. When Marin saw the trees ahead start to thin out, the sun's rays began piercing through the canopy. She'd kept moving through the night, sensing Ethan not far behind. He'd caught her a couple more times during the night following the encounter with the wolfhound, but she'd made decent time, considering. Snack? No, it's a command. It's not a redeem, actually. So if you do exclamation point meds, it should work. Exclamation point meds. It's all good. There you go. I try to take them around 9, but I have them. Thank you. Yes. Meds. They're important. Yes. I don't want to take them just yet because I haven't finished reading, but they are ready to go. Thank you. And I would go get a snack, but yeah, that would require getting up. I don't happen to have one here with me tonight, so. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. All those lovely self-care things. There we go. Chapter 13. Oh, okay, here we go. Okay. She paused momentarily, brushing a few strands of hair from her face before she tied the black bandana around her forehead to hold back her hair, the same one that Ethan had used as a blindfold when this whole thing started. Mentally, she took inventory as she began moving again. She was down to one knife, a canteen full of water, and several strips of jerky. She studied the tree line for a moment, scanning the area with her eyes, and in the forest. She could sense Ethan now, off to her left and slightly behind. That fact alone spurred her forward, though she was still careful with her movement. It surprised her that she could sense him now after months of being unable to. Shaking her head, she pulled her attention back to the present, using the shadows cast by the trees as she continued towards the clearing. It was the same one that Andrew had shown her 2 days previously. The question now was, how to get across the clearing and into the cover of the trees beyond without Ethan tagging her with a stun dart again. Ethan had his carbine ready as he reached the edge of the clearing and settled into position with good cover. He checked the magazine and noted that he should have enough darts left between it and the other magazine in his vest. You knew where Marin was and where she would probably enter the clearing. Even if she skirted the outside opposite him, she'd still be within range. He brought the weapon up to his shoulder and made it ready. Marin moved slowly towards the tree line, scanning with the force as she stopped behind one of the larger trees. Her danger sense tingled again, and it was strong this time. For a moment, she bit her lips, scanning the clearing. There wasn't much to hide behind, so she'd have to cross quickly. After a moment's thought, she reached into the forest, finding a tree about 200 yards away. She could sense the faint presence of some birds there, and she reached out, shaking the tree and causing them to take flight. The sudden sound and flight of birds caught Ethan's attention, and he moved to cover the area for a moment, scanning through the scope with one eye while he watched over the rest of the area. He didn't see any other movement and didn't want to risk giving away his position by firing a shot. Marin felt a slight shift and took off, moving across the clearing as carefully as possible. The warning tingle spiked, and Marin broke into a full-out run, making for the nearest boulder. There! He spotted her running with his other eye, quickly brought his carbine around, firing a shot. He could tell he didn't lead her enough and continued to track her, firing twice, but she was already to the first boulder. Spast! Marin ducked and rolled the last few meters, sliding to a stop as she found herself in the boulder's shadow. Some of those darts had been close. Too close. She just sat there for a moment, catching her breath before gulping water from her canteen. It was not the most brilliant of moves, but she'd had little time or choice. She could feel Ethan's intensity now. He'd focused in. She'd have a difficult time. He shifted to his right along the edge of the woods, his crosshairs focused on the boulder Marin chose to hide behind. He went down a few meters and then settled back down and waited. Slowly, Marin rose to a crouch. She'd had to keep moving. She only had till midday. With a silent curse, she crouched, keeping close to the boulder as she checked again. He's moved, she swore. Not much she could do about that. For a moment, she pondered. There has to be a way that I can draw him off. But how? She knew she could touch people's thoughts like she could alter machines. What if I can change his focus? Make him think I've gone another direction? She squeezed her eyes shut then and started breathing slowly, focusing on where he was. Now came the hard part. In her mind, she saw herself crouched behind the boulder. He knew where she was, but maybe... She took the mental image, pushing it outwards towards him, envisioning it taking off towards the next boulder in front of her. By now, she was already sweating. At the same time that the image moved, she took off running to the boulder to her left. He felt his vision go fuzzy, just around the edges, and then he saw Marin take off, going towards the boulder in front of her. Bad move, he thought, as he lined up the shot, leading her, and fired. But she didn't fall. He had enough lead and fired again, and then he saw her simply fade away. He looked and saw her move behind another boulder, the boulder off behind the one he initially saw her moving towards. Force tricked me, he seethed as he stood up, upset, and fired 3 quick shots in the direction of the boulder she was hidden behind, hoping for a ricochet. Marin knelt behind the boulder, sweat streaming down her face. She was shaking. That had taken a lot out of her. Her danger sense screamed. The next instant she heard 2 impacts against the boulder, and then... Fairvic! She dove for the dirt, trying to avoid the third one. It must have rebounded off the other one. She could feel his anger and the force. It felt like someone had dumped boiling water on her. He checked the magazine, which had 5 stun darts left. With more in the other, he lined up and fired 2 more rounds at the other side of the boulder, again hoping for a ricochet. She hugged the ground, not daring to move with the darts flying around like they were. She yelped as she felt something jab into her leg. It was a stun dart. She rose to her knees, trying to fight the effects, but the next instant she sprawled in the grass, out cold. Her left hand could just be seen beyond the boulder. He saw her hand and noticed that it didn't move for a few moments. Use a mind trick on me, will you? He said as he watched for a few moments before moving up the path. He already had a final perch selected, and he'd be waiting. I'm going to stop right there because we have an ad coming up in a few seconds. So, okay. While we're in the ad break, I'm going to take my meds because they're important. Okay. I'm spiking my mic a little bit, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Oh, we're in ad. Okay. Well, should be back in about 55 seconds. Well, meds are taken. Give me just 1 second. I'm gonna check that while I'm looking at stuff. Okay. Should be back in about 20 seconds. Okay, and we're back. Thanks for hanging out through that ad. I appreciate you. And thanks for the meds reminder. I'm notoriously bad about not remembering to take them. That's why that command even exists. Because I forget all the time. Alright. Like I said, my channel is all about cozy vibes and self-care and cozy story time. Right? That's why we're here. Okay. 30 minutes later, Marin rolled over. When she tried to sit up, she fell back to the grass with a curse. That last stunt had taken more energy than she thought. For a few moments, she just lay there, feeling as if the world was spinning. She closed her eyes and began breathing slowly, calming her racing pulse. She reached into the force, but this time she felt a nudging to draw the energy into herself, something she hadn't done before. It was several minutes before she sat up again and felt steady enough to eat something. Swallowing the last bite, she rolled to her knees and shouldered her pack again. She knew Ethan had kept moving. He was further away now, and she was having difficulty sensing him. Scanning the clearing once more, she moved cautiously towards the trail leading to the Praxium. That was the last leg before she finally made it back. Her progress was slow, as her head spun slightly when she stood. The sun climbed higher, and she observed the changing shadows, judging that she had maybe 2 hours left before her time was up. If I don't make it back before midday, she cut that thought off, not wanting to ponder what the results would be. She already knew how mad Ethan was. Before long, she found herself at the head of the trail that led back to the Praxium. She knew better than to keep to the path itself, so she slipped off into the trees, scanning ahead cautiously. Ethan had selected a prime position close to the wall of the Praxium. He had an excellent field of view of the trail and the surrounding woods. He'd exchanged magazines, even though he had 2 shots left in the one he had been using first. He had a round chambered and had a fresh magazine loaded and ready. He was supposed to do his best to stop her, and he would, one way or another. Marin slowly and carefully moved through the trees, grateful for the cool dimness after the rising sun had beat down on her. She was starting to feel the lack of sleep and the adrenaline let down. Besides adrenaline, the energy she'd drawn into herself was the only thing keeping her going. She briefly considered trying the same trick again, but quickly discarded that thought, as it had angered Ethan and sapped much of her strength. 15 minutes passed as she made careful progress through the trees and the underbrush, varying her path as much as she could. He decided on an old trick and took a deep breath, letting out the loud call of the predator as he had done at home on Snuggis. She should have expected that. Marin jumped slightly in surprise and then felt like kicking herself. She should have considered that he'd use that again. She stopped moving, hoping he hadn't seen her. Gotcha, he said quietly as he settled in and moved the crosshairs to where he'd seen the movement. He didn't actually see her, but it didn't matter, he thought with a grin as he lined up and fired. Sithspawn, Marin cursed silently as her danger sense flared again. She dropped to the ground, trying to deflect the dart with the force as she did so. He saw it fly towards the spot, and then deflect and move in a different direction. He muttered it as he lined up again and got ready for 2 more. Marin let out the breath she'd been holding as she faintly heard the dart fall to the leaf-strewn ground a few feet from her position. She was already moving, belly crawling through the undergrowth. Less chance of her being seen, she hoped. He was close, but that was because she was moving closer to where he was. She'd cross his line of fire in the next few minutes at the rate she was going. He guessed the direction she might take, adjusting his aim, and quickly fired 2 shots along one line before shifting to fire 2 more along another possible line she'd take. Her danger sense flared again, not once, but 4 times. She froze, trying to track them. 2 passed well in front of her, and 1 was off to her left, but the other... She cursed and flattened herself to the forest floor, the loamy, crisp scent of the leaves filling her nose as she attempted to deflect the last dart. He saw the final dart fly off, which meant one thing. "Ha!" he yelled as he lined up and started to fire off 3 in a row. Marin heard his exclamation and cursed under her breath, crawling forward a few meters before she dived behind a tree. She wasn't quite fast enough, and she felt the breeze from 2 darts as they passed within inches of her. But the other... Her leg burned. She saw a tear in her trousers and a thin gash as she looked down. The dart had nicked her but kept going. Swearing under her breath, she unwound one of the fabric strips from her hand and dabbed at the gash. He started scanning where he'd first placed the 3 shots. He couldn't tell, but he noticed a tree near where he knew Marin had been. He placed a shot on either side, wondering if he might score a hit. Marin swore under her breath, flattening herself to the leaves once more. This time she tried a more subtle approach. Instead of sending the darts wide, she altered their course just enough so they missed, but hopefully not enough that it was glaringly obvious. One buried itself in the next tree, but the other she tried to reverse and send back the way it came, not knowing if it would actually work. The first shot passed from what he saw, but the second, he almost didn't move fast enough before it passed by where his arm had been, and ricocheted harmlessly off the stone wall. He looked at where it had hit, and then back towards the tree, knowing it came from the one he fired to the right. Now he settled in, mumbling curses and waiting as he settled his scope on the tree. He would send a salvo in that direction as soon as he saw a trace. Marin sensed the faint spike of irritation from his direction and the strong sense of someone watching her. She lay among the leaves, trying to formulate a plan. She could see the outer wall of the Praxium a few dozen meters away, and he was between her and her goal. Slowly, she scanned the wall, searching for him. Ethan stayed there, still as he could be. He'd had the time while she was under from the last dart in the clearing and traded the woodland camo for a different cover, prepared to blend in with the stonework and rock around him. With a frustrated curse under her breath, Marin let it be. She could generally sense where he was, but try as she might, she couldn't actually spot him, no matter how many times she tried. Carefully, she belly crawled away from the tree, moving slightly off from parallel to the wall. She studied the trees for a long moment, trying to figure out what to do next. He continued to scan the area around the tree, keeping it within sight as he moved slowly from side to side. Carefully, Marin crawled a few more meters until she stopped behind a large tree, resting her back against the trunk as she considered what to do next. She had to get over that wall, and she knew the gate was not an option. With a frustrated sigh, she blew a few strands of hair out of her face as she looked up at the tree above her and got an idea. Keeping the tree between her and the wall, she jumped to the lowest branch. He heard a rustle, but he didn't see any sign of movement. He thought about it for a moment, decreased his zoom on the scope, and started scanning a larger area. Slowly, he scanned to the right, going closer to the wall when he saw a few leaves falling from a tree. He traced the line from where he'd fired earlier to the first tree, and then to where he saw the leaves. It was a direct line to the wall, and leaves meant that she was back up in the limbs. With that knowledge, he started to scan up the tree. She could feel his attention shift again and zero in on her. It was as if he had some sort of motion detector. Gritting her teeth in frustration, Marin kept her back to the trunk, trying to not present a profile as she inched carefully around the trunk and away from what she guessed was his line of sight, based on where she sensed him. Oh, sorry. He tried to guess how far up she might have gone, but she wouldn't have gone beyond the first few sets of branches. He shifted his aim to the left, popped 2 shots off in that direction, and then held his aim off to the right, but kept looking towards the left. Marin felt them coming. The first dart passed... The first dart passed within inches of her. The second one was even closer. It brushed her arm. She swallowed. He knew where she was, at least in a general sense. Biting her lip, she climbed to the next limb and began studying the distance to the wall. It was close enough that she could make it. Ethan didn't see anything. He looked up from the scope and for the first time looked at the distance between the tree and the wall. She couldn't make that jump. Could she? He flipped the fire select from single round to 3-round burst as he thought about it and waited. Marin frowned as she studied the distance. It was going to be close. That much she knew. With a muttered curse, she crouched on the limb, taking a cautious sip from her canteen as she weighed her chances. Stowing her canteen, she began taking slow breaths as she considered her options. She knew trying to project again as she took the jump would not be a good idea. She'd have to take the jump and hope she could deflect whatever came at her. She stood slowly and gauged the distance as she tightened the straps on her pack. An instant later, she moved, running easily along the limb as if it were the wire Andre had shown her. When she reached the end, she leaped, pushing against the limb with the force just enough to give her more speed. He saw her running along one of the limbs, hard towards the monastery's outer wall in his peripheral vision. He couldn't believe it, but swung the carbine around and started firing 3-round bursts. She ran faster down the limb and then leaped off the end to try and reach the wall. He switched to full auto and tried to lead her in midair. Marin's danger sense screamed. In midair, she tucked and rolled as she reached the highest point in her leap before she extended. She could feel the darts streaking towards her, hot burning embers of warning in her mind. Barely moving, she flicked her wrist, trying to deflect the darts as she dove towards the wall. There were so many! A few seconds later, she grasped the top edge of the wall, using her momentum to flip over it. She knew she couldn't block all of them. Spast! He wanted to yell as he held the trigger down until he heard a clicking sound, telling him the magazine was empty of stun darts. He slung his carbine and pulled his blaster from his hip, flipping the selector to stun, and started aiming for her flight line. He wasn't going to give this to her. He'd never lost an objective before, and he wouldn't start now. Ethan couldn't tell it because of his focus, but he was letting himself become too absorbed into the exercise. Marin landed lightly on the inner wall, catching her balance as she studied the courtyard below. She could see a class in session over near the training circle, but that wasn't her objective. With a deep breath, Marin crouched again, feeling the flash of Ethan's anger. The next instant, she leaped, arching down to the courtyard below, mere seconds before a blaster bolt hit the wall where she'd just been. She landed in a crouch, hoping the noise didn't disrupt the class, for it was one of Master Card's. Quickly, she shut her pack, palming her knife as she did so, but then she thought better of it when she spied a rack of bokken off to the side. There were 3 remaining. She flicked her fingers, calling one to her as she kept her presence as closed off as possible. He was beyond frustrated now as he saw her reach the wall and leap down before the stun bolt he'd fired. She was inside the wall now, back into the Praxium. He broke into a run, holstering his blaster as he did so, towards the main gate. When he reached the doors and turned to see where she had stood, her pack to the side, with a bokken in her hands, he approached her quickly, tossing his camo aside and grabbing a bokken from another rack as he increased his pace, and then started charging. Vervik, Marin breathed, moving laterally away from the wall to give herself space. Ethan was coming in fast. She swallowed and began slowing her breathing as she'd been taught. Her fingers flexed on the smooth wooden hilt as she spread her feet and raised her blade in a defensive posture. She wouldn't attack. Ethan didn't know how to handle a sword, but it didn't matter. He was running mainly on knowing that he'd failed to keep her from reaching the objective. He knew he wasn't to make it impossible, but he didn't expect the way the test had gone. He rushed in and started to swing from the right side. Marin sidestepped, her reflexes slightly sluggish from adrenaline as she swung her blade around to block, snapping a kick to his left side as she did so. Faintly, she could sense the class on the other side of the courtyard, but her concern right now was Ethan. The kick to his side seemed to spur him on as he moved in with a one-handed overhead strike. As soon as he saw her block, he grabbed her by the wrist and began to pull her towards him to flip her over. Marin hissed in surprise, her booted feet slipping on the paving stones as he dragged her forward and twisted to throw her. She flailed, remembering to tuck and roll as the paving stones rushed up to meet her. She was instantly on her feet, charging towards him, her blade sweeping towards his feet. She ducked under his swing before driving her shoulder into his stomach. It almost knocked the air out of his lungs when her shoulder hit. He grabbed the bokken with one hand and her shoulder with the other as he got ready to bring the end of his bokken down into her back. Marin's danger sense screamed, and she let go of her bokken, watching it clatter to the paving stones a few meters away. She turned, twisting against his grip as she brought her knee up, slamming it into the side of his own. "Arr!" He couldn't help but yell from the impact, which got the other students' attention from the training circle. He backed up, hobbling as he gripped his knee and glared at her from where he'd moved. He grabbed his bokken again, leaping forward and raising his weapon over his head, before starting to bring it down with all his strength. But he didn't connect. Stefan intercepted the strike with his bare hand and dragged Ethan off balance and down onto the paving stones using his own momentum. Marin stood frozen in shock. Her breathing was fast and heavy, and she realized belatedly that they were now the focus of everyone's attention. Her cheeks flushed in embarrassment as she realized her condition, and she couldn't find the strength to greet Master Card. Instead, she slid to the paving stones, finally succumbing to the adrenaline crash in almost 2 days without sleep. Stefan stood over Ethan with the bokken Ethan had used in his grip, with the point facing the downed man. "Whenever you're ready to start calming down," he said quietly, looking at his students and calling a little louder. "Marin's exhausted from her trial. Get her to her quarters." "Yes, Sensei," several answered, and 3 of them, including Jared, started running to Marin's side. Marin's vision swam as 2 helped her to her feet. She looked over at Ethan and Stefan for a moment, wondering if the whole ordeal had been worth it. Had she passed? The thought faded as she felt someone lift her in their arms. She blinked and turned her head to find that it was Jared. She smiled faintly before she lay her head against his shoulder and let sleep claim her. And that is the end of chapter 13. Dun dun dun. What's going to happen next? Let's find out next time. Yes, that is the end of chapter 13. Thank you guys for hanging out. A lot longer than planned this evening, but I appreciate you guys hanging out and keeping me company. I hope you enjoyed. And we'll be reading again in 2 weeks. Actually, no. Thank you. Thank you, Wraith. Let me take a real quick look at my calendar. Sorry, brain. Oh my goodness. Because there's a holiday in there somewhere. Let's see. So yes, there's a holiday going on, so we'll find out. Give me 1 second. Okay. So yes. So the next story time stream is in 2 weeks. Yes, Wednesday, December 4th. I will also be streaming on Sunday, December 1st with a writing workshop. There will not be a stream on Wednesday, December 27th, because that is the day before Thanksgiving, and I'm going to be traveling, so will not have access to my computer for streaming. Yes, so there is no stream next Wednesday. Sorry, guys. So I will see you guys all on December 1st for my next stream, which is a writing workshop. And also December 1st is going to be the first day of 12 Days of Starlight. For those that aren't aware of what 12 Days of Starlight is, it's 12 days at the beginning of December where streamers can participate and help raise money for Starlight Children's Foundation. Starlight Children's Foundation helps raise money for kids who are ill, such as receiving cancer treatments, who are stuck in the hospital, and it helps raise money to get them hospital gowns and toys and games so that they can be a kid and not, be solely focused on being stuck in the hospital, because that's no fun. So I will be streaming 4 days between December 1st and the 12th. Sunday the 1st, Wednesday the 4th, that Friday, wait 1 second. So, yeah, brain. So, December 1st, December 4th, which are normally scheduled streams. I will be also streaming on Friday the 6th, and then again on Wednesday the 11th as part of streaming for Starlight. I'm still keeping to my, outside of that, I'm still keeping to my regularly scheduled content. So I would love for you guys to join me and help support Starlight if you're able to do so. Even if you're not, I would appreciate you hanging out and keeping me company. And I hope that we can raise some money for these kids that are in need. So I will see you guys on December 1st. Have a lovely Thanksgiving. Have a great night. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. I'm actually not going to read out because it's like 9:30, so I need to start getting ready for bed. But I'm very grateful for each and every one of you that was here this evening, whether you're returning or you're new. I appreciate you all, and I hope you have a great night. Thank you so much. Have a great night, guys. Bye.